Magandang umaga, magandang tanghali, magandang hapon at magandang gabi. Yan na yung ating pagbati sa lahat ng mga nanunood at nakikinig sa atin. Ito po yung inyong oras. Sinasabi nga natin ang pamagat ng ating palatuntunan ay Rita Gadi's Hour. Ngunit kung inyong pakinggan yung mga nakaraan nating mga salita at mga programa, actually the Rita Gadi Hour is your hour. And every week, every Tuesday, alas 5 ng hapon dito sa Pilipinas, maraming sa ibang bansa nanonood din at nakikinig sa atin. So whatever time it is that you will be opening or listening to us on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, wherever else social networking is available, this is your hour, and I'd like to welcome you once again. We are in this period of the pandemic, 8 months into it, and here in our country, in the Philippines, we have had so many quarantines, lockdowns, and all kinds of health protocols to be able to contain the virus in order to be safe. We still do not know what else can be done, but the most effective actually is wearing a mask, washing your face, washing your hands. Now it's washing your shield and not washing, putting on a shield. And of course, the most important of it all when you're outside, and that is physical distancing. As far as our country is concerned, our president may be announcing anytime soon, perhaps tonight or even sooner, whatever else we have to follow, and perhaps the different categories likewise of the quarantines. We have a general enhanced, we have an enhanced, and all kinds of adjectives attached to the quarantine. Nagbigay na rin tayo ng ibig sabihin ng quarantine. 40 araw yon. It's like the Quaresma of Lent in the Christian ritual, during the period where we observe ourselves, the fasting and the abstinence before the Holy Week, and this is the period of Lent. 40 days yan. But if you actually look at the origin of that quarantine word, this came about when there was a plague somewhere in Europe. And in Venice, the big ships that were docking were not allowed to be docking near the shoreline or near the embankment. They had to wait there in the open sea, several miles away from population, for at least 40 days. So they were quarantined. That was where it began, before they could come in, because that was the period they felt during the time when that they also had this virus, the Black Plague or the Red Plague or whatever plague it was infesting many countries in Europe. So they also had that quarantine. That was where it began. And then of course, we use that word when we speak of the Quaresma, the 40 days of Lent, the observation of our ritual of fasting and abstinence to prepare for the Holy Week, which is the rituals of commemorating and reminding us of the journey of Christ from the time that he was at the Last Supper, and then the trial that he had with the Sanhedrins and the Pharisees, and then of course finally the flagellation, the way of the cross, and then Golgotha, the place where he was to be executed by the Romans, and that was Pilate, as a matter of fact. So we speak of that in that sense when we speak of Quaresma, but we speak of the quarantine, which is to isolate people and isolate communities so that you could contain the spread of the virus. Now, for this hour that we talk about, we are approaching the presidential elections in the United States of America. That will be in a couple of days from now. And over the past weeks and days, we have seen debates conducted between the candidates themselves, Biden, or how else do you pronounce it, Biden, and the incumbent President Donald Trump. If you have been able to watch these debates, then you would have an idea of who you're going to vote for, or perhaps many of you in America have already voted, because then they allow voting by mail or voting ahead of the actual voting date so that they do not crowd in the voting areas, and also one of the observations of social distancing, which is important for this period of the pandemic. But what is happening in the United States of America that we should be concerned about? Many of us outside of the mainland and perhaps even those in Alaska and in Honolulu are busy analyzing themselves firstly to find out who they're going to vote for. That is where we go back to Plato. In his book, The Republic, he was already advocating the fact that there should be an academy for voters. That's for us, so that we are trained and we study and we know how to vote and who to vote for. And then in other, there's also the other academy that he wanted to pursue, and that is the academy of the leaders themselves, or those who are entering the electoral period, or those who wanted to be elected into office. And they should also have an academy training them for the office that they are running for. In ancient times, they only had the Senate, which was just one legislative gathering of all the elderlies and those that would want to legislate and discuss several matters, policies, national policies. Those are the Roman times. And if we go back to it, like I've always done, to look at the origin of the words and the origin of certain institutions, which we follow today, well, I will not go into the extensive discussion of Plato, because then you would see that he does not believe in democracy. He does not believe in the rule of the mob, as he calls it, which is what the democratic way of life is, the rule of the majority. Let's get back now to how I started this program, and that is the elections that you're having in the United States of America. Why do we have to talk about this? Because there you could see that anything that happens in the most powerful country in the world, is it still the most powerful country in the world? But that is actually the description that we have of the United States of America. What happens there? Their elections of the presidential candidates that are running, the different offices that they have that are also part of the electoral process, the suffrage process, and whatever it is that happens there affects the rest of the world. But it affects our country even most particularly, especially former colonies of the United States of America, because there seems to be the umbilical cord that is still connected somewhere between the mother and the child, so to speak, and that is America, which we consider not as our father or mother, but our brother. That is how they have termed it before, to make it appear as though we are in equal status with them. But as I've said, whatever happens in America affects countries of the world, and particularly our country. We have been under America for 45 years after the last World War, but prior to that, actually, we were not just after the Second World War, but this was during the termination of the Spanish colonization of our country. We had something like 300 years of Spanish rule, and that was all over the country. You had Miguel Lopez de Legazpi, who actually established the claim of Spain over our islands. That is why we were called Pilipinas, after the son of the Spanish parentage. And then the America came into the picture, and there was a fight or a war or whatever else, a battle between the United States of America and Spain. And the Spanish Armada was defeated, America took over, and they signed a treaty between these two countries, Spain and the Philippines, and that was done in Paris. We were not invited because we were not yet a nation, we were not yet a country, we were not yet an independent people, we were still a former colony of Spain, and then America took over. So we were at the time, at the Treaty of Paris, signing a colony of the United States of America. What happened then, that was 1889, until all the way, how many years was that? 45 years or so. And then we had the Second World War, and we were still under the Americans when the war broke out. So you could see how in the 45 years that America held us as a colony, there were many things that we learned from the United States. We owe them, for instance, the ideals of freedom, justice, and democracy. We were fighting for this during the Spanish times, and that is exactly why we had the Philippine Revolution, short-lived as it may be, but that was the tenor of the Katipunan and the writings and the battles that we had. We wanted to be independent, we wanted freedom, we wanted justice. The idea of democracy came from the United States of America. They already had that, and those are the ideals that they brought here to the Philippines, to the country. And in a way, although we were colonized by America at the time, we had the Governor General, who was an American, but then we also had a government that was functioning, Filipinos. We had our own parliament. We had the executive offices under the supervision, administration, and management of the Governor General. So in a way, it was some kind of a transitioning. Natuto tayo ng mga American ways nung panahon na yon, yung kanilang sinasabing yung freedom, ano ba yan? Kalayaan and all of this other rights that we inherited from the Constitution of America and the writing of the Constitution 1935, the Malolos Constitution, and several other provisions thereat, which brought us into that platform of the American kind of government. And that's exactly what we were saying, that whatever now affects us have been, you can trace it to the roots and the origins of where all of these ideals of government have come from, and that is the United States of America. Over the years, many things have happened. We've had a roller coaster ride as far as that is concerned, and even though nagbigay na sila ng independence sa atin, and this was after the Second World War, kailan ba yan? July 4th, 1946. Yung gera natapos na sa Europe, tapos natapos na rin dito sa atin with the liberation of our country from the Japanese, 1944. So, 1945, liberation na yan, free na tayo from the Japanese occupation. And the next year after that, 1946, binigyan na tayo ng ating independence from the United States of America. So we were no longer flying the American flag, and we were not considered anymore as American citizens of a colonized country. We already had our own Filipino citizenship at that time. So yun ang mga palakad ng panahon na yun. But they retained several properties because nagkaroon pa rin ng tinatawag na Laurel-Langley Bill sa Amerika between President Laurel and Senator, the official there, si Langley. Nagkaroon yung at saka yung Tidings-McDuffie Law, doon yung sa kanilang Senado, ginawang batas yung Laurel-Langley Agreement na yan. Agreement lang yan dati, ginawa nilang batas. Anong tawag dyan? Kung igsian natin yung tawag dyan para maintindihan natin yung parity rights. Anong ibig sabihin ng parity? Sa Tagalog nga, pare-pareho. Equal rights ng mga Amerikano sa mga Pilipino. Kaya sa panahon na yon, nung tayo ay colonized ng Amerika, sila ang may hawak ng mga lalaking industriya, malalaking factory, mga malalaking corporations dito. Yung ating telephone company, sila nagpapalakad, kanila yon. Yung ating electric company, sa kanila yon. Mga Amerikanong may hawak doon. Yung ating tubig, sa kanila yon. At nung panahon na yon, pati yung pag-portion ng gas, yung pagluto, mga tubo yan, parang mga tubo ng tubig, parang yung wire ng electric. Pero ito, tubo ng gas na yun ang sa mga bahay, yun ang ginagamit sa pagluto. So, all of these other companies, and then of course, production of food. Dati ini-import pa natin yung mga sausage, yung mga production ng mga canned goods, na isagawa na yan para dito ng mga Amerikano, yun ang kanilang mga hawak. Businesses, lahat na yun. At sila, they also had the right to own real estate properties. Kaya maraming mga, kagaya ng Forbes Parks, diyan nagsimula yan. Si Governor Forbes, diyan nakatira yung mga opisyal na mga Amerikano. Kaya natawag yan na Forbes Park, hindi na nga napalitan yung pangalan. So, they owned houses there. They had ranches all over, from the north all the way to the south. Sa Mindanao, marami rin silang nasagawa. Yung mga simula ng ating mga plantations doon, sa kanila rin ang galing. So be that as it may, they had a very big impact on us, including the buildings that were constructed. They were patterned after many of the buildings in their capital. Yung mga post office natin, yung ngayon, mga ano na yan, mga museums. Pero noon, Department of Agriculture, Department of Finance, Department of Tourism, yan yung mga buildings na yun. Kung titingnan ninyo yung structure na yun, the architectural design, yan ang pattern na kinuha nila galing sa capital ng Amerika, sa Washington. Ganon din yung mga pillars. Of course, if you go back in time, hindi lang originally American yan, galing pa yan sa mga Greco. The Greeks actually were the ones who first constructed the Ionic columns, Doric columns, lahat yung mga structures na yan, na ginaya na rin after time, yung mga classical classical architecture. So yon ginawa sa capital ng Amerika sa Washington, D.C. Washington District of Columbia ang tawag doon. Kaya ginaya yan dito. Pati yan si Burnham na nag-design ng mga landscaping, kung tatawagin mo landscaping yon. Pero the infrastructure of of Manila at the time, wala pang Metro Manila, of Manila, was patterned after Washington, D.C. in America, at ang nag-design yan si Burnham. Kaya ngayon, andun na lang na tinatawag natin Burnham Park. Pero kung talagang titingnan natin yung history ng mga dinesign ni Burnham, yung, dito sa Maynila, siya ang gumawa niyang designs na yan. So, ganun na mga influences na bahagi dito sa atin ng mga Amerikano. Ngunit kahit na nabigyan tayo ng independence, as I was saying, even though we were granted our freedom to rule ourselves, kasi nung pinag-uusapan yan, merong delegasyon ng mga Pilipino na pumunta sa Amerika at sabi nila, bigyan na tayo ng independence. Maraming tumutol dito. Ang sabi nga, hindi pa tayo handa for the functioning democracy that America would have wanted here in our country. Ngunit yung sinasabi nga, yung mga nationalists at lahat ng yan, yung delegation na pumunta sa Amerika, talagang pinilit nila kay President Wilson, lahat yung mga opisyales doon, nabigyan tayo ng independence. So, yun ang nangyari. Ngunit, yung sinasabi ko nga, yung parity rights, hanggang 1974 yan. Kaya kahit na nabigyan na tayo ng independence noong 1944, meron pa rin yung parity rights hanggang 1974. They had equal rights, yun nga, pare-pareho ng mga karapatan dito sa ating bayan. At ang kanila rin na hindi inalis dito sa atin, two of the largest military bases of America outside of the American mainland. Alam na niyo yan. Diyan sa Clark Air Base, Air Force Base sa Clark, sa Angeles, at yung Subic Naval Base diyan sa Olongapo. Kaya yan dalawang bases na yan, military bases na yan, hawak pa rin ng Amerika. Supposedly for 100 years. Pero ang nangyari diyan, sabi nga nung panahon ni President Marcos, bakit ganong kahaba nahahawakan ng mga Amerikano yan? And yun na nga, sa international law, pagka may hawak ang isang bansa ng isang lugar for 30 years, yung sinasabing possession is ownership after 30 years. Ganon na nangyari sa Cuba. Ang Cuba, former colony rin, o nag-away ang Amerikano at saka mga Cuba. I think even today you have movies regarding this. But the military base in Cuba, yung tinatawag na Guantanamo, sa Guantanamo, hawak ng mga Amerikano yan at hindi yan nalipat sa mga Cubano sa Cuba. Kaya hanggang sa kasalukuyan, the Guantanamo base is still the property, the military base of the United States of America. Na alam ni Marcos yan. Kaya naisip niya, kung aabot na ng 30 years ang hawak ng mga Amerikano dito sa mga bases na ito, kanila na. Kaya ang ginawa niya, nagpatawag siya ng review. Inayos yung ating military defense treaty sa Amerika at sinabi ni Marcos doon, ay iigsin na natin yan. 25 years na lang. Hindi na yung 100 years na gusto ng mga Amerikano. 25 years na lang. At yan, mag-e-expire yan ng 1992. Kaya kung titingnan natin, inigsian at 25 years. Pero sabi nga ni Marcos, pag gusto ng isang Pangulo na mag-amend o palitan o merong gawin sa treaty na yan, pwedeng gawin yan every 5 years. Kaya meron din tayong karapatan na ayusin yan, palitan yan, o completely to abrogate it, to rescind it. So, yan ang nangyari. What is the influence, therefore, of all of this? Well, nakita natin how strategic the two bases are. Clark Air Base and the Subic Naval Base, they were critical points of reference when it comes to geopolitics, sapagkat tandaan ninyo, kahit na nagawa na yung United Nations Organization na kung saan maraming bansa, over 100, nagpirmahan na wag na magkaroon ng digmaan sa mundo kasi nagkaroon nga ng dalawang magkasunod na World War. Kaya ayaw na nila na mag-aaway-away pa. Ngunit, kahit na nga merong ganun na pinag-usapan sa United Nations, nagkakaroon pa rin ng gera. Ang isa dyan, halimbawa, yun nangyari dito sa Vietnam. Nag-away ang North Vietnam at South Vietnam. Ang North Vietnam, ang tumutulong ang Russia, ang Soviet Union. Ang South Vietnam, ang tumutulong ay ang United States of America. And that's why we call it a surrogate war between two powers, between the military power of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and the military power of the United States of America. So, crucial sa kanila itong dalawang bases dito sa atin. Yung kanilang naval base at yung kanilang Clark Air Force Base. Dito nila tinatambak yung mga ammunitions, lahat ng war material na kinakailangan dalahin at i-transport sa Vietnam dun sa gera. At maliban dyan, yung kanilang mga military personnel, yung servicemen, mga sundalo, dito rin bumababa bago sila pumunta sa Vietnam. Yung mga namamatay naman at mga nasusugatan ng mga Amerikano doon, dito rin binabagsak bago kung dito magagamot sila, kung hindi, padadala sa Amerika, crossing the Pacific Ocean. So during that Vietnam War, these two bases is very critical. Maliban dyan, nagkaroon din ng away sa, hindi naman away, there was also the conflict in the Korean Peninsula. Kasi nung nangyari na natapos na yung World War, nahati yan. Ang Soviet Union at ang Amerika hinati. Yung kalahati niyan, which is North Korea, ang Soviet Union ang may hawak. Ang South Korea naman ang may hawak, ang United States of America. You see how these world powers balkanize the world. North and South Vietnam. Tapos ayun, North and South Korea. Ngunit sa gera na yan, nagkaroon ng conflict, hindi naman talaga malaking gera, pero nagdalagay sila ng tinatawag na demarcation line, na parang tawag nila doon 38 parallel. Ewan ko kung saan nanggaling yung 38, magre-research ako. But that was a 38 parallel sa hati, sa paghati niya ng dalawang Korea. Andun na naman ang mga Soviets sa North, andun na naman ang Amerika sa South. Kung bawal sa kanila na magtawid dyan, bawal na mag-escape from North to South, bawal pumasok yung mga Southerners papuntang North, pero nagkaroon ng parang medyo malaki na conflict, nagkaroon ng violence, kaya nagkaroon ng Korean War. Diyan na naman nagkaroon ng papel itong dalawang bases dito sa atin, sapagkat during the Korean War, andyan na naman ang dalawang bases na yan na dito sa Pilipinas, nagpapadala ng mga armas at mga tao na lumalaban doon sa gera na yon. Balikan ko lang yung nangyari sa Vietnam, halimbawa. Ang Amerika gusto sumali tayo sa Vietnam War. Marami sa inyo nakakaalam na ayaw ni Marcos. Sabi nga ni Marcos, Vietnam is my neighbor. It's only about 4 hours away. Hindi maganda para sa ating foreign policy na aawayan natin yung ating kapitbahay. Hindi naman sila nag-invade sa atin. Wala naman tayong galit sa kanila. Ang gera ay Amerika at saka ang Soviet Union. Bakit tayo sasali? So Marcos did not send a combat troop to join the Americans to fight in Vietnam. Sa higalit ng Amerika, si Lyndon Johnson ang presidente during the time. And of course, he was very irritated and mad at Marcos for not sending a combat troop to join America to fight the Soviets in Vietnam. But Marcos said, okay, I will send my military, but they will only be some kind of a contingent for reconstruction, for medical services. Hindi sila magdadala ng armas, hindi sila babaril, hindi sila makikipag-away doon. Para lang token of alliance with the United States of America. So that was what happened. Ngunit sa Korea, ang nangyari dyan, nagpadala rin tayo. Hindi naman basta combat troop, ngunit kinailangan din ng konting tulong ang mga South Koreans at nagpadala tayo ng ating mga contingents doon, and that was where we also joined. And there were several other wars in the world after that. Mga gera na nasagawa sa iba't ibang lugar sa mundo, ngunit madalas dito dumadaan sa atin. Because when you cross the Pacific, ang talagang babagsakan nila is the strategic location of the Philippines. And while the bases were here, gamit pa rin ng Amerikano yan. And that is why, if we're going to tie this up with what's happening in America, kahit na natapos na yung ating military defense treaty sa kanila, at yung mga bases nila ay hindi na in-extend yung kanilang, ang tawag dito, yung kanilang occupation nito mga bases na ito, noong 1992, because that was the expiration date during Marcos time. Kaya noong 1992, sa Senado, pinag-usapan yan, nagkaroon ng maraming bisita dito sa atin na kausapin si Aquino, si Mrs. Aquino at that time, kung sino pa yung ibang presidente na at that time, sinasabi nga na kung pwede, i-extend yung paggamit ng mga bases. Ngunit sa Senado, sinabi nila tama na. following the Marcos idea that the termination of the use of the bases will be in 1992, sinunod na yan ng Philippine Senate kahit na si President Marcos ay patay na at the time, but that was his original plan and that was followed in 1992. So ang nangyari dyan, hindi lang sa termination ng occupation ng mga Amerikano, pumutok ang Mount Pinatubo at napakalaki at napakalawak ng devastation na ginawa ng Mount Pinatubo. Nakita nyo siguro nung panahon na yon yung mga Amerikano sa Clark at sa Sunag nagtakbuhan lahat with all the ashfall, kung ano man ang kanilang mabibitbit, dala nila sapagkat ang lakas nung sila ang pinakamalapit kasi doon sa lugar na yon, both bases actually. So in addition to nature itself that sent the Americans scampering away from those bases, it was also determination of the extension of those bases in our country based on the Military Defense Treaty Agreement. So wala na, natapos na yun doon. But what is America's influence still as far as our country is concerned? Militarily, aba, ang nangyari ay pumasok sila at sabi, maglagay tayo ng military exercises, ite-training namin ang mga sundalo ninyo. Kaya nung panahon ni Ramos, nagkaroon ng Visiting Forces Agreement. Anong ibig sabihin yan? Bumibisita yung mga sundalo ng Amerika dito at ite-training daw. Ito talaga naman nagkaroon ng training ang ating mga sundalo. But the question there is, training for what? For jungle warfare? For fighting the communists? For fighting those who want to overthrow the government? For the enemies of the state? We were not at war with any country. Tandaan ninyo yan. Wala tayong kalaban at that time. Ngunit ang training ng ating mga sundalo ay kinakailangan daw, sabi ng mga Amerikano, na matuto sila ng kung ano man yung state-of-the-art military warfare kasi nanggaling na sila sa ibang bansa na turuan ng ating mga sundalo kung paano lumaban. Whatever it is, excuse lang yan po para makapasok sila ulit sa Pilipinas kasi wala na yung bases nila. Ngunit kung merong Visiting Forces Agreement, pwede sila mag-standby dito. Bakit nagkakaroon ng ganoon? Sapagkat lumalakas na at lumalaki na ang People's Republic of China. At ang Amerika, binabantayan, nakikita, naku, baka ito ay masyado ng maging powerful, kailangan kami lang ang powerful. So that's the hegemony, actually, ang tawag doon. Anyway, other than the Visiting Forces Agreement, also, pumasok din sila dun sa tinatawag na Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. Enhanced Defense. Defense na naman. Para kanino yon? Para kanino yung Enhanced Defense Agreement? Para sa atin o para sa kanila? Again, I will repeat, wala tayong kalaban. We had no enemies, no countries invading us, no country is trying to fight us. We are friends with all countries of the world. In fact, it was President Marcos who opened diplomatic relations with the enemies of America, the People's Republic of China. Nauna tayo sa Soviet Union. When it was not yet the Russian Federation, it was called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Parang United States of America na maraming states. Sa Soviet Union, ganun din. Maraming mga independent republics connected to the Soviet capital of Moscow. Kaya ang tawag sa kanila ay Soviet Republics. So, ganun kalaki ang Soviet Union. At yun, kalaban ng Amerika, ideologically, politically, militarily, economically, lahat na maiisip mo na philosophy or ideology, whatever, is added to your word. Ganun lahat ang kalaki ng diferensya between the United States of America and the Soviet Union. But we were the first of the allies of America to open friendship and diplomatic relations with the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, the Soviet Union, in short. Ang unang nagpunta doon si Mrs. Marcos. Kaya yun na nga ang mahalaga na bumisita muna siya bago nagkaroon ng state visit ni President Marcos sa Soviet Union at pagbubukas ng foreign relations, meaning naglagay tayo ng ating embassy, ng ating embahada doon at dito rin sa Pilipinas naglagay din ng embassy ang Soviet Union. Ganon din ang ginawa natin sa China, which is also, again, a diametrically opposed ideology. Communism, the communism of Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai and Deng Xiaoping, all of these communist leaders, doon din tayo pumunta. In fact, nauna pa nga tayo sa Moscow, pagkatapos sumunod sa People's Republic of China, nagkaroon din tayo ng diplomatic relations. Nauna dyan pumunta si Mrs. Marcos, kaibigan muna, hello, hello, kamusta kayo, kamusta kami, ganito kami ngayon, until the state visit of President Marcos to the People's Republic of China. Again, the opening of diplomatic relations, the embassy of the Philippines in China, and in the same manner, reciprocally, dito rin yung embassy ng People's Republic of China sa Pilipinas. Kaya makikita ninyo na nung panahon na yon, na pumasok na naman ang Amerika dito sa tinatawag ko ng Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, o yung shortcut niyan, EDCA, para ano, para saan? Para kanino? Wala na tayong kalaban. Even during the height of the Vietnam War, hindi naman tayo inaway ng Vietnam. At the height of the Korean War, ang China tumutulong sa North Korea, hindi naman tayo inaway ng China kahit na nasa kabilang kampo tayo, sa kampo ng mga Amerikano. So sinong kalaban natin? Wala naman tayong, wala namang invasion dito sa Pilipinas. What is the EDCA for? Well, maybe one of these days I should read to you the provisions of the EDCA and perhaps your hair will stand. Kasi kung titingnan mo, ay para saan ba ito? Ang sabi nila, para tulungan daw tayo tungkol sa climate change. Bakit kailangan ng sundalo at military personnel para sa climate change? Tutulungan daw tayo sa humanitarian assistance for disasters. Parati naman silang dumadating kung nagkakaroon ng disaster. They were one of the first, for instance, that came into Tacloban in the Eastern Visayas provinces nung nagkaroon ng Yolanda. One of the strongest storm surge of our contemporary history. Nagulat nga sila when they were tracking this. Hindi na halos magkasya doon sa screen ng television sa lawak nung storm na yan. At grabe ang nangyari talaga sa Eastern Visayas provinces. Ang unang dumating dyan para maggawa ng connection sa tubig at tumulong, kasi tubig is so vital at the time, kasi nasira lahat ng infrastructure, dumating ang mga Amerikano, silang tumulong. So bakit kinakailangan pa magkaroon ng EDCA? Kung sasabihin nga doon sa provisions ng EDCA na yan, tutulungan tayo sa natural disasters. They already do that. They have a funding for this. That is part of their humanitarian activity. Meron silang budget tungkol dyan. Anyway, ano pa ang nakalagay dyan sa provisions na yan? Marami pang iba. Ngunit ang pinaka nakakatakot dyan ay binigyan natin sila ng access sa 8 military bases ng Pilipinas. Our own military bases. Pinayagan natin na sila ay pwedeng magtayo ng kanilang building yan, o yung building na meron dyan, pwede na silang mag-occupy dyan because of that EDCA. So, nakapasok sila sa 8 bases natin. These are not American bases. These are Philippine military bases. In strategic locations, sa Dajanga, sa Zamboanga, sa Palawan, sa Angeles, sa Nueva Ecija. Strategic locations yan. So nakita ninyo, nung unang panahon, Clark lang at saka Subic. Ngayon, ang dami na nilang pwedeng pasukan. For example, sa Sarangani, they have one of the most modern runways, yung airport doon. Sa Sambal, dito sa Palawan. So sa lahat ng mga Philippine bases na yan, meron sila na ino-occupy na building. Libre ang elektrisidad, tayo nagbabayad nun kasi building natin yon, lupa natin yon. Libre ang tubig, tayo nagbabayad nun kasi sa atin din yon. Ano lang ang meron doon, hindi natin alam. Alam natin may mga sundalo doon. Alam natin na meron silang mga ammunitions doon. Alam natin na meron silang mga dinadala galing sa kanilang military institutions Amerika, pero hindi tayo pwedeng pumasok, bawal. Kailangan magpaalam o kailangan merong written something para, at bakit tayo mag-i-inspeksyon? Yun ang kanilang tanong. Why will you inspect? This is already part of the EDCA agreement. Yan ang sinasabi ko nga. Kahit na nabigyan na tayo ng independence, na-terminate na yung tinatawag na Military Defense Treaty Extension ng mga bases, nakakalusot pa rin at nakakapasok pa rin. Is this good for us? Kayo na ang sasagot. Sapagkat sa kasalukuyan, nakita ninyo, ingay ng ingay ang mga ibang tao na sinasabi, naku, ang China nag-o-occupy ng mga islands dyan sa South China Sea. Gaano kalayo yan? 200 miles away from our country. yung mga island na yan. Meron tayong tinatawag dyan na exclusive zone na sa atin under international law sa atin, pero pwede tayong pumayag na ang ibang tao, ang ibang bansa pwede mangisda dyan, pwede siyang dumagdaan-daan dyan kasi navigational highway yan doon sa South China Sea. Ngayon, ang nangyayari ay maraming tao nagsasabi, naku, ayan na ang China, nakapasok na dyan sa mga islands na yan. 200 miles away, tandaan ninyo, from our shoreline. Kung saan man yung dulo ng Palawan, dulo ng Zamboanga, dulo ng Sulu, at saka kung ano man yung mga islands doon sa western seaboard pala ng ating bansa, ay malayo yung mga islets na yan na merong military installations ang China. Ngunit, ang hindi sinasabi ng mga namimintas tungkol dyan ay dito mismo sa loob ng Pilipinas, merong American bases sa Philippine bases natin. Na wala namang kabuluhan at walang storya kung bakit andyan sila. To defend from what? To defend America against China. So, andito tayo sa tinatawag nga. Sino ba nagsabi niyang salita na yan? The Asia Pivot. Ibig sabihin, dito ang pinaka-importanteng lugar ngayon ng century na ito, itong mga taon na ito, si Obama. Siya nagsimulang magsabi niyan. Kasi nung panahon ni Obama, pinirmahan yan. Bago dumating si Obama dito for a state visit sa Pilipinas, napirmahan na yung EDCA na yan. Parang regalo pa nga sa mga Amerikano. Pwede kayo ngayon tumira dito sa mga bases na ito. Kumbaga sa Bisaya pa, maayo na kayo mag-star. You can stay already in these bases. And they're here. And they're actually there operating. So what happens? Makikipag-away sila sa China. Saan manggagaling yung kanilang dito? In those Philippine bases. Kung magalit ang China kasi tinitira sila ng mga Amerikano coming from here, tayo ang bobombahin. Is it not? Is it not simple logic? It's not even military strategy. It's simple common sense kung talagang tutuusin. And that is why, going back to what I say, the elections in America and whoever will sit there as president and other high officials affect the world and particularly our country. So you could see that over the past so many years, in spite of the fact that the bases of America, the largest ones, are no longer in existence for them, we still have them here around with 2 agreements that were signed during the time of Ramos and the other one signed during the time of Noynoy. So you could see that they're very much present. But hindi lang yan. We still have financial institutions that control the flow of money in the world. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and then of course you have other financial institutions that actually do the calculations of what kind of money they're going to give to people or at the countries that are developing. Kaya ang ginagawa ng mga institutions na yan, pautang ng pautang, pataas ng pataas ang interest, para yung pautang nila, sila rin na magdidikta kung saan po gamitin yung pera. And that is why ang lungkot dito sa atin, imbes na yung mga inuutang para galing dyan sa mga financial institutions na yan, na ang may hawak ay mga oligarchs na mga Amerikano at mga British. The oligarchs of the world are the ones controlling these finance institutions. Sila ang magdidikta. Papautangin yung isang bansa, ngunit sila rin ang magdidikta. This is how you're going to use the money that we're going to lend you. Ang malungkot dyan, ang kanilang mga dinidikta kung saan gagamitin, hindi para sa ikabubuti ng bayan. Example, dito sa atin, over the years that we have been under the thumb of the IMF and the World Bank and all of this, and the Asian Development Bank, all of these institutions, na-develop ba natin ang ating agrikultura? Did they give enough provisions for whatever it is that they're dictating on us, how to use that money that they're lending? Hindi. Ginagawa nila for infrastructure, mga tulay-tulay, ganyan, para sabihin, that is the improvement. Ngunit ang pinakamahalaga ay pagkain. And we are the source of one of the most fertile soils in the world. We are the source of all the strategic minerals of the world. Hindi yan ang na-develop. Hindi yan ang sinabihan na yung pautang sa inyo, diyan gagawin. Kung talagang sana doon natutukan yan, then we will be exporting our products, exporting our vegetables, exporting our poultry, our meat products, exporting whatever it is that we grow. Not just fruits, But actually, other vegetables that are so vital now, malunggay lang halimbawa, tingnan niyo ang mga nagagawa ng malunggay, okra, ampalaya, all of this. Onions we are importing. Bakit? Kasi hindi nga na-develop yung... Anyway, so that is why I say in many of my broadcasts, mahalaga ang nangyayari sa Amerika sapagkat talagang meron pa rin koneksyon sa mga nangyayari sa ibang bansa ng mundo at lalong-lalo na dito sa atin sa Pilipinas. Kaya sinasabi nga natin, the elections that will be held a couple of days from now will be very, very crucial as far as foreign policy and the way America will also be treating countries like the Philippines. We have to acknowledge the fact that, for instance, I'm not campaigning here, I'm stating facts. President Trump was able to establish a connection with Northern Korea, which is already one of the biggest historical events of our time, that he was able to meet with the president of North Korea so that there could be an understanding leading to the peace between the two Koreas. Hindi lang yan, between America and the Soviet Union. Kasi sabi ko nga, ang North hawak ng Soviet, ang South hawak ng Amerika. So the mere fact na tumawid si Donald Trump papunta ng North Korea at yung North Korean President tumawid din papunta ng South Korea, para bang nakakatuwa yung kanilang ginawa, and they had that special agreement which they signed na nagkakaroon ng kaintindihan. That already is a very historic event. Pangalawang beses pumunta siya doon. Naku, yung mga nakapaligid kay Trump, ayaw nila, lalo na yung mga gumagawa ng armas kasi gusto nila ng gera, hanap buhay nila yon. Ngunit tinuloy din niya yung pagpunta doon. Twice he went there to the border, and twice he met with the president of North Korea. Again, as I've said, it is all for the purpose of establishing peace. Recently, anong ginawa niya? Sa Washington, nagkaroon din ng pag-uusap sa Middle Eastern countries. Sa Jordan, sa Israel, yung mga gulo doon between the Palestinians and the Jews, nagkaroon din siya ng nag-broker, so to speak, para magkaroon ng pagkakaintindihan. And several other of the things that he has done in order to be able to establish peace, hindi na nagawa yan na kahit na sinong presidente before him. Hindi nagawa yung ganyang klaseng foreign policy. And also what he did with here, the Pacific region, for instance, meron tayong yung Trans-Pacific group of countries. Lahat yan yung mga bansa na nakapaligid sa Pacific Rim. Parang nagtayo ang mga previous administrations ng Amerika na lahat yung mga bansa surrounding the Pacific Ocean, kaya tinawag nga the Pacific Rim, ay magkakaroon ng parang exchange ng commerce and industry. Ngunit ang nangyayari, hindi equal yung trade na yan. Yung mga malalaking bansa dito sa Rim, ang nakikipag-trade sa malalaking bansa. Yung maliliit, hindi makapasok dyan, hindi makadun. Sabi ni Trump, alisin na yan. Walang kwenta yan. Kasi unang-una, hindi yan nakakabuti sa lahat. Kailangan, kung merong organisasyon na ganyan, lahat ay makikinabang. So, isa rin yan na nagawa niya. Pagkatapos, anong ginawa niya sa NATO? Yung NATO is a North Alliance Treaty Organization. Sa Europe yan. Nagtayo sila niyan kasi takot din sila sa Soviet Union. Kapitbahay nila doon. Maliliit lang kasi yung mga bansa sa Europe. So, yung NATO na yan, tinayo ng Amerika dyan at ang Amerika na rin ang popondo. Well, if you go to Frankfurt, for instance, yung American base yan is one of the most exclusive and most expensive real estate property in Frankfurt. Nasa taas ng bundok yan. Ang ganda-ganda. Parang yan yung Forbes Park nga, so to speak. Anyway, so yun na nangyari dyan sa NATO. At sabi nga ni Trump, bayad tayo ng bayad to maintain that. Bakit? Ginagera ba kayo ng Soviet Union? Bakit hindi kayo magbayad yan for your own defense? Malalaki na kayo. Germany is one of the most progressive of all the economies in Europe. At yung mga ibang bansa niyan, France, Belgium, Austria, lahat ng yan. Bakit Amerika lang daw nagbabayad, sabi ni Trump. So yun din sabi niya, ay itigil na yung ginagaso sapagkat kailangan yung pera to develop America. Yung kanyang America first nga sinasabi niya, America can be great again. So anyway, marami pa akong maisasabi tungkol nga sa ginagawa na yan. Ito naman, Republican siya, threatened siya ng candidacy ni Biden for the presidency. Ang masasabi ko lang kay Biden, hindi ko alam kung ano yung mga policies niya kasi wala pa naman siyang experience anywhere, yan sa other than his candidacy now. Kaya wala pa tayong background masyado tungkol kay Biden. Ngunit, there are two things that I will not vote for him if I were an American. Pro-abortion, at saka, biruin mo, pwede magpatay ka ng bata sa loob ng tiyan ng nanay. At yun ang sabi nga, pwede yung marriage na yan between genders na whatever it is, yun ang malungkot doon na pwede yung pati yung tinatawag na mga ibang mga critical moral laws na sana ay panindigan niya. So mahalaga yan. Di na mo si Trump ang sinabi niya talagang hindi pwede yung abortion na yan sa kanyang administrasyon. Si Biden, kaya kung masasabi ko lang kung ano yung criticism ko dyan kay Biden, isa na yon. There are several others, of course. And then you have the Vice President of Biden. Marami ring issues yung babae na yan. Not that, that I would be saying anything wrong as far as having a woman candidate is concerned, but that is for them now to decide sapagkat nakikita naman nila sa mga pagsasalita at sa mga kanilang propaganda kung anong klaseng mga tao itong dalawang ito. How will that be affecting us? I've already mentioned the military bases and all of this. Economically, andyan ang IMF and World Bank. At ang mahalaga din dito ay para maintindihan natin, nag-iiba na ang galaw ng mundo. It is no longer the old geopolitics that we have been so used to. Yung sinasabi nga na kung kalaban ka because of your ideology, iba na yan. Like for instance, look at Putin. Russia, the Soviet Union is supposedly a communist country. And they have no religion. Ang propaganda dyan, they're atheists. Wala silang religion. Communism does not have any religious belief. But Putin is a Russian Orthodox and a Marian devotee of the Blessed Virgin. So nakita nyo, nag-iiba na. It is not just the political philosophy that is changing, but it is also the religious portion of foreign policy and the administration of a country that was known to be communist, nag-iiba. Sa People's Republic of China, isa rin malaking bagay ang ginawa ni Xi Jinping. He wants to connect the whole world of countries by what is known as the Silk Route, which is the train system that will be moving from one country to the other, which China is financing, so that there will be an exchange of trade and commerce from one country to the other, instead of, sabi nga niya, imbes na gagastos kayo ng pera ninyo para bumili ng mga armas and to protect yourself, mag-business na lang tayo. And he started this about 7-8 years ago, and it has crossed already several countries in Central Europe and all the way Mongolia, nakatawid na ng Pakistan, and that's supposed to be the One Belt, One Road program. One Belt, One Road, patterned after the old Silk Route. Sabi nga, nung unang panahon, there was trade all over the world, pero yan, ang gamit nila, mga camels, mga donkeys, mga kabayo, yun lang ang pinaglalagyan ng kanilang mga products. Pumupunta sila sa isang lugar, sa isang bansa, nagbabagsak sila ng kanilang merchandise, at kumukuha sila ng merchandise sa kabila. Wala pang ang pera nun eh. It was barter. And that is why it was the Silk Route, kasi yung kanilang basis ng exchange was silk. Silk was only produced in China at that time. It was one of the most expensive clothing that existed. Kaya kung magkano yung measurement ng silk na yun, doon binabasa yung measurement nung binebenta mo. Kung nagtitinda ka ng spices, nagtitinda ka ng carpets, nagtitinda ka ng brassware, yung value na is based on the value of the silk. Kaya Silk Route ang tawag. So what did Xi Jinping do? He patterned now this One Belt, One Road by building the railway system. Hindi na mga kabayo, hindi na mga camels, hindi na mga ancient ways of transportation. Now it's the state-of-the-art and one of the most modern train systems crossing countries, but stopping over at certain strategic places in one country para magkaroon ng ang tawag dito, the interchange of commerce and industry, negosyo, business. And he is doing this not only in Europe and crossing Central Asia, and although may malapit na rin dito sa edge ng Asia mainland, he's also doing this in Africa. In fact, nauna pa nga ang Africa. Several months ago, there was this big inauguration of the railway system in Djibouti, in Dhaka. Dhaka is familiar perhaps to many of you who are aficionados of car races. Usually, andyan yung mga sa Dhaka, yung car race. And then, of course, you had the division of Sudan. You have North and South Sudan. Darfur is also now an economic buzz, an economic center. Gawa lahat yan ng China. Na ang mga African countries din magkaroon ng sarili nilang exchange of trade and business para nga magkaroon ng a lively kind of an industrialization that will be undertaken in every country. Kasi sinasabi nga natin Africa is so poor, etc. But I'm going back to how at this time geopolitics has changed. It is no longer that China is pushing for communism throughout the world. Kagaya nung panahon na yon na sinasabi nga na they were indoctrinating countries and so forth, and people and children and students. Ngayon, the indoctrination is for business. Kaya mahalaga po yan. So, all of these things that are happening today are changes that are already applicable to many things that we are doing. Foreign policy, for instance, you have it already in our Constitution. We have an independent foreign policy. Panahon pa ni Marcos yan. Kaya inulit na lang yan dito ni President Duterte sapagkat ngayon, kinakailangan na balansehin ng ating pamahalaan, and that's exactly what President Duterte is doing and has done with the address that he delivered at the United Nations General Assembly last September via this networking Zoom or whatever you call it. Hindi na talaga siya pumunta nun sa New York, ngunit he was broadcast throughout the world to 100 countries, 180 countries members of the United Nations during the regular General Assembly. 75 years na yung United Nations na yan. And one of the most applauded and one of the most important speeches delivered there in the rostrum of the United Nations, yung speech ng ating presidente. Kasi sabi nga niya, let us stop hating each other very much. Hindi ba ang cute ng pagkasabi? Talagang hindi natin masasabi na lahat magkakaibigan. Kahit na sa isang pamilya, meron din talagang hidwaan, merong hindi pagkakaintindihan. Kaya ang nangyayari, magsusuntukan o hindi magbabatian, mag-aaway, ganun din sa mga bansa. Kaya ang importante dito ay yung sinabi nga ng ating Pangulo. Hindi niya sinabi, let us have peace. He did not have all of these general platitudes and palliatives as far as telling the world, let us work for peace. And sabi niya, let us try not to hate each other very much. And that is a very down-to-earth statement, so typical of the president. And for that, we have to acknowledge how he was able to address the world at this particular stage when all of us ought to be united already because of this pandemic. Pero just to wrap up, napakahalaga ng ating relationship sa nangyayari sa Amerika. Sa susunod na ating mga programa, ikikwento ko rin kung ano ang ginawa ng Amerika dito sa Pilipinas, hindi lamang sa financial at saka sa military, ngunit sa paghawak sa mga pangulo na sa nakaraan at sa pagtanggal ng ating Pangulong President Marcos. Lahat yan is an American manner of spreading its tentacles throughout the world and, trying to remove people they do not like, to put people that they like. Kaya talagang nakikialam pa rin. But it is understandable because they are considered as the big brother of all these big nations. And precisely because of the ideals of freedom, justice, and democracy, yun din ang kanilang nais ipakita sa buong mundo. Ngunit na iba na nga. Ngayon, it is just guns, guns, guns. The manufacture of ammunitions and all of these weapons of mass destruction to earn more and to declare wars in other countries so that there will be more of these guns and rifles and missiles that will be bought. Malungkot yan na nangyayari. Let us pray that there will be changes done in the United Nations as far as the Security Council is concerned. Let us also pray that we can maintain the independence of our foreign policy. And let us pray that many things that were started during the time of President Marcos as far as programs of government are concerned can also have a continuance during this time. Next program, perhaps we will be discussing and talking about that, so that last time I talked about the back and forth, but this time it's a little forward-looking, and that is, we wish the best and pray for the best as far as the voting goes in the United States of America, because as I've said, it is very important that we understand what's going on in geopolitics and how whatever happens as far as the elections in America are concerned will affect us directly in a very substantial way. So this is Rita Gadi for your hour. I'd like to thank you for having joined us, and stay safe, wear your mask, observe physical distancing, and let's go over all of that every day. And of course, what's most important, put your hands together in prayer every minute of the day. Every word that you mention, every word that you express, make it a prayer. We need it at this stage. Thank you for having joined me. This is Rita Gadi.